Welcome to an all-new podcast based on Incident Prevention Magazine's very popular column called The Voice of Experience, which is written by Danny Rains. As some of you may already know, Danny worked for Georgia Power for 40 years and has been consulting and educating utilities and utility contractors ever since. He's been one of the most popular speakers at our annual conferences and our webinar events. We are very excited to bring Danny's extensive knowledge and experience to our podcast offerings. We hope that you'll join us throughout the year as Danny provides utility safety and ops professionals like you with impactful utility safety and ops insights and observations. With that said, let's join in with Danny now as he talks in greater detail about lone worker limitations, a subject he covered in his column for the December 2020, January 2021 issue of Incident Prevention Magazine.
Hello, everyone. This is Danny Rains. I think many of you probably know me or have seen me sometime in the past, but I want to take a little bit of time here and talk about one of the last articles I just wrote. A little bit of history on me. I worked at Georgia Power for 40 years. I went to work as a helper on the line crew in 1967 and retired in 2007 as the corporate safety consultant for distribution and transmission. And since then, I have my own company, Range Utility Safety Solutions, LLC, and have about 200 customers across the United States and Canada and several other places to where I have actually gone and done performed and provided training and presented training programs to employees, investigated accidents, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But today I want to talk about the last article. The last article I wrote that was in I think the December issue of IP was the limitations of the lone worker. Right now, I have a customer that's struggling trying to define what the limitations of a lone worker are. And it really revolves around underground. And we'll get to that in a little bit. But first, what I want to do is I want to share with you what the standard says. Now, a lot of people ask me a question, and you know, those of you who know me know my first response is what does the regulation require? The regulations, OSHA regulations, are whats and whys. They're not hows. The how-to, the interpretation, and to determine the intent of that regulation is nothing more than up to the employer. They have to decide exactly how far one way or another they want that to go. Now, OSHA regulations are pretty specific, but the training that's required, I want to talk about this first, because if you're not an A2 qualified employee, you can't work by yourself in energized areas, exposed areas, or be subjected to anything over 50 volts AC, because that's the way the world is, okay? Just for example, all employees covered under this section, which is 1910-269, generation, transmission, and distribution, each employee shall be trained in and familiar with safety-related practices, safety procedures, and other requirements. Geez, what did I just say? I didn't say anything. What kind of safety practices? What kind of safety procedures and other safety requirements? That's up to the employer. They're just saying you can't put somebody out there that's not prepared to do what you're expecting them to do. And then there's other parts of the training. We'll talk about that. The employee also should be trained and familiar with safety practices, including emergency procedures. Now, it may not even be talked about in this lesson, in this regulation, but you still got to practice them. Manhole, pole top, bucket, lower control bucket rescue, all of those things. They may not be specifically addressed here, but you still got to cover them, okay? Now then, this next sentence, and I wanted to share this because this will probably be related to another one of the podcasts that I'll do soon when it comes to informational transfer, informational sharing when host contractors hire independent contractors. And that's a big deal. But this one here came in 2014 when the standard was updated. And it says, the degree of training shall be determined by the risk of the employee for the hazard involved. Holy mackerel. That is amazing. What that's saying in there is I can task the intent. my interpretation is I can task train you to do certain tasks within this 269 standard, and you will never be a 269 A2 qualified electrical worker, a lineman that's going to put rubber gloves on or use sticks or do any of those other things. But I can task specifically train you to enter a substation, to do thermography or do harmonics, do work or do environmental reclamation. There's a lot of things I can do that will basically qualify you to do that. But that one sentence, the degree of training shall be determined by the risk of the employee for the hazard involved. That kind of opened the door. And that sentence was actually put in the standard in 14 at the request of contractors. So each qualified employee shall be trained necessary exposed to identify exposed live parts from other parts of equipment. What's hot, what's not. Skills, techniques necessary to determine nominal voltage in exposed live parts. Okay. The minimum approach distance. Okay. Set by your employer. If your employer doesn't set the minimum approach distance, or if your contract employer doesn't, then they have to fall back and can't do less than alternative tables 6 and 7 on distribution and transmission. The proper use of precautionary techniques, personal protective equipment, insulating, shielding materials, and all the insulated tools for working on or near exposed energized part. Boom. There you go. Okay. So if you don't have these things, you can never be an A2 qualified worker unless you're task qualified according to that 269 A2CI. Okay. Now then I'm going to jump down to paragraph L in the regulation, and let's talk about, now then I'm a qualified person. What can I do? What can I do out there? What is allowable for me to do? And I think on the overhead part of it, it's pretty much cut and dried. Okay. It is what it is on overhead. You have, if you're within minimum approach, okay, and you're working on anything, you're going to get within the MAD itself, or you're going to actually touch something, or you're going to put a piece of equipment in MAD. It takes 2 people. Boom, done. Now, underground is the one that I want to focus on a little bit. And I know I'm long-winded, and I'll run out of time before I get through today, and I may have to finish it up later. But I want to at least get you to the point to where you can ask the right kind of questions if there's a question that needs to be asked. Here's the part that I want to discuss, and that's L2I. That's minimum approach. It's found in 1910-269, L2 and the letter I. At least 2 employees are required. And now this is the vague part of the description, because it doesn't say overhead, underground, transmission, distribution, substation, doesn't say anything. It says installation and removal of or repair of lines energized at more than 600 volts. If you're going to pick it up, you're going to work on it, you're going to get a clearance, switch it, tag it, ground it, then you got to have 2 people. Done. Thinking overhead. Installation, removal, repair of de-energized lines if the employee is exposed to contact with other parts that are energized more than 600 volts. Yes. And also, if it's de-energized and has not been checked for the absence of voltage and grounded, it's got to be considered energized. So, there's another way to look at that other than the way it's actually written. Okay. Work involving the use of mechanical equipment other than insulated aerial lifts, parts energized 600 volts and more, and other work that exposes the employee to electrical hazards greater than or equal to the electrical hazards posed by operations specifically named in the last 3 sentences we just read. All right, so that requires 2 people. The next section says, and this is kind of where we're going to dive off into maybe underground here. Or there's other things you can do too. And I'll give you a couple examples that I've dealt with over time. This section does not apply to the following operations, : that's this L2-2I. Routine circuit switching when employer can demonstrate that the conditions at the site allow safe performance of his work. Work performed with live line tools when a position of the employee is such that he or she neither within reach or otherwise exposed to contact. Otherwise exposed to contact probably means and should be interpreted as MAD, okay, of energized parts. And emergency repairs to the extent necessary to safeguard general public. Boom. There's the get out of jail free for a lot of different companies out there that have single workers, lone workers. Maybe a service technician, maybe a trouble person, whatever you call them, whatever you want to call them, okay? Many companies, including the company I worked for years, did and still does have troublemen working by themselves, and they do a lot of stuff. And if they ever have to work on 600 volts or more, if they ever have to change out a transformer, pick up a primary, they'll put two troublemen together, and they can do that if another one is available. If not, they'll have to call somebody in. But here's the thing, routine switching. What does that look like? Opening and closing a set of gang switches on overhead, no problem. Switching in a substation, as long as you're outside minimum approach, not a problem, okay? How about switching an underground elbow in a pad mount transformer? Now, then, don't you think about that for a few minutes. According to what I have been taught and understand, if you got now our term was dead make or dead front, and that is insulated elbows and bushings. They're insulated for the voltage that's in the underground system, okay? So there's no MAD period until you pull that elbow off. If you have a small interface 25 kV elbow and you got 14.4 single phase to ground, you got about 1.5 inches of probe sticking out beyond the elbow. There's the exposure. But you're on the end of a 6 or an 8 foot stick, you're not violating minimum approach unless your company has declared minimum approach to be much larger or more than what the alternative table 6 is, which is about 31 inches. So that's really up to your employer. If they want to switch out, if they want to open a transformer, do they need a second person there? They inspect the transformer, look for any kind of damages to the transformer or abnormal conditions. I always say, look, listen, okay, and smell. If nothing is impending failure that you can identify, then it's perfectly okay to bend down and unlock that lock and get pentahead bolt out with a socket and a ratchet. Then put on your gloves, put on your arc-rated FR clothing, which you should already have on, and safety glasses and a hard hat and rubber gloves, and open that door. Whether it's a single phase flip up pad mount or whether it's a three-phase pad mount with a loop. Now, live front, we'll talk about that next time. Right now, the only thing I want to talk about is nothing but energized cables working in an insulated medium, okay? So we don't violate minimum approach. And it says here, if routine circuit switching, that don't say underground or overhead, it just says you can demonstrate the conditions a site is safe, okay? So once you get the lid open or the door open, then you start looking for impending or possible failures, swollen bushings, swollen elbows, leaking transformer, buzzing sounds, abnormal humming, like single phase condition of a transformer. Then it's not normal operations. Then you might want the second person there, because especially if it's night. There's a lot of people differentiate night to day, other than light conditions, of course. If it's night, I need a second person. If it's daytime, I can do it by myself. I hadn't quite figured that one out because that's not in the regulation. Here it is. Routine circuit switching with a stick, okay? Maybe you have a bad cable, or maybe you're just going to switch out a section of cable between pad 2 and 3. So you're going to go to your normal open point and close it, go to pad 2 and then pull it off, put it on a feed through bush and check for the absence of voltage, and then park it, and then you're going to go back to pad 3 and do the same thing. You have not violated minimum approach anywhere there. There's no hazards that you have not identified. If there's additional hazards there, then get you a second person. In that article, and as a result of a customer request, I've got a spreadsheet, and I'd be glad to share it with anybody that's listening. that I did 20 different companies, and it included investor-owned utilities, electric cooperatives, large and small municipals, and contractors working on those systems. What do you do and what do you allow? Do you allow them to open the transformer, take thermography, and then close the transformer? Do you allow them to open the transformer by themselves, catch a case of trouble, switch, replace a transformer fuse? What do you do? Do you allow somebody to take and cover up the elbows and bushings with, say, class 2 or 3 equipment, whatever you need on nominal system voltage, and then work on secondaries, hook up a temporary service, whatever? Those are the kinds of questions that I answered on that spreadsheet. And there's about 20 companies, and it was a pretty good mix across the board as to, what they did. And I'll be glad to furnish that to anybody. If you basically want to get in touch with me, I think my information will be on this article, but it's rainsafety@gmail.com. That's 1S. And just email me, and I will be glad to send that spreadsheet to you, just to where you can see what everybody else said and how the companies are handling it. I'd be glad to do that. It's not a problem at all. The next time, maybe when we're going to talk about underground operations in the next issue, because Kate's already told me that. And I will be talking more about lone workers and problems that 2-person crews can run into when working underground. And I remember particularly there was an article I wrote several years ago about catching a case of trouble on a bad underground service that could have almost got somebody killed had we not followed the directions and the regulation and the training of my company to the T. And we identified a condition that occurred because somebody was doing horizontal bore and cut 4 services. He drove right through the middle of 4 underground triplex services and damaged them. And one of them finally went bad, but the other leg was damaged. It was also heated up. So by the condition, it was all in water, at a duck crossing on a road. And it was a mess. It was. But I'll talk about that more on the next occasion. But thank you for listening. If there's anything else I can do, be glad to answer questions. Just give me a call or send me an email. Thanks. Be safe. God bless, and see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for this very first episode of The Voice of Experience by Danny Rains. If you'd like to hear more of our podcasts, go to our website at incident-prevention.com/podcasts to get more, or search Incident Prevention wherever you get your podcasts from. Until next time, stay safe.